Well, we're here. That means this episode was cleared for public release, but just barely. Play along with me. Have you heard this? Hey there, can you just take a quick look at this? There it is, the friendly customer request, the casual email, the hallway conversation, or maybe a Teams message with no punctuation, no funding, no mod, no revised scope, and absolutely no concern for your line of profit. You'll hear, can you just help us out? Can you just support this one meeting? And because contractors are helpful, responsive, customer-focused professionals with a deep desire to keep the client happy and avoid becoming the difficult one, they say yes. They say yes with no scope review, no cost impact, no change order, just smiles and a shiny badge of honor. And then it happens. 3 months later, finance is staring at the project numbers. Like somebody just found a body in the spreadsheet. The work is over. The customer is happy. The team was responsive. And the profit is gone. Congratulations, you didn't just provide customer service. You donated your labor with your logo. Today, our subject is what happens when customer direction becomes unpriced work. Because under fixed price or performance-based or just plain poorly controlled contracting environments, helpfulness can get very expensive. Very expensive. And if your team cannot tell the difference between supporting the customer and the need to change the contract, then you don't just have customer intimacy, you have a profit leak with a great attitude.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.
Broadcasting from deep inside the Federal Acquisition Labyrinth, this is the GovCon Show. This show is for acquisition pros, wannabe pros, and procurement insiders who need a place to unpack the chaos. We speak fluent contracting and sarcasm. No clearance required. This is the GovCon Show. And away we go!
Welcome back to the GovCon Show. As you know, we're broadcasting live from deep inside the Federal Acquisition Labyrinth, where the scope is blurry, the emails are friendly, and somehow everyone remembers the customer request just a little different after the invoice gets questioned. This show is therapy for the overworked and the overregulated and the underappreciated. I promise, not a lecture, and it's certainly not a webinar. Yep, we speak fluent FAR, with a little sarcasm and a whole lot of truth. Today we're talking about one of the places contractors lose money without really even realizing it. That's customer direction. Not the formal kind, not the kind that shows up in a nice bilateral modification with funding and scope and a period of performance where everyone is behaving like adults. No, that's not the topic today. Today's topic is the informal kind. Just a quick question kind, the small favor kind, the this should not take long kind, which is usually where the trouble starts wearing business casual. Here's the problem. Customer direction does not always look like direction. Sometimes it looks like collaboration or urgency, and sometimes it looks like being a good contractor. And that's why it's so dangerous. Nobody walks into the room and says, "Good morning, team. I'd like to casually expand the contract scope without any funding, authority, or documentation." That doesn't happen. That would at least be honest. Instead, it sounds very normal. Can your team attend these extra meetings? Hey, it would be great if you could bring in subcontractor X to help with this. Can you support this until we can figure out the next move? And there it is, until we figure out the next move or the next mod. That phrase should come with flashing lights and a faint smell of burning profit. Because the moment the contractor starts performing first and figuring out the contract later, The risk has already moved, and it's usually moved in one direction, toward the contractor. Now, to be fair, most of the time the customer is not trying to trick you. They're not sitting there like a cartoon villain twisting their mustache and saying, how can I get 20 extra hours this week without a contract mod? They're trying to solve a problem. They have pressure too, and we have to recognize that. They have deadlines and mission demands. They may not know their request is creating a scope issue or a cost issue, a schedule issue, or a subcontracting issue. But here's the hard truth. Their lack of intent does not protect your profit line. A well-meaning request can still create unpriced work. A friendly email can still create performance risk. And of course, that collaborative meeting can still change everyone's expectations. And the customer who likes you can still ask for something that is completely outside of the contract. And if your company performs it without recognizing the risk, documenting the issue, and preserving its rights, well, that's not a partnership. That's really just uncontrolled execution. And uncontrolled execution is where your profits quietly disappear. And truth be told, every company has some version of the phrase. Just support the customer. It does. It sounds noble and very professional. It sounds like the kind of thing leadership says when they want to be seen as responsive, but don't want to slow down long enough to review the actual contract. And I absolutely agree. Absolutely. Supporting the customer really, truly matters. But don't misunderstand me. This is not an episode about being difficult. It's not an episode about saying no to everything. Nobody wants to work with a contractor who turns every question into a hostage negotiation. And that is not what this is about. But support the customer cannot mean perform first and think later. That is not responsiveness. That is exposure. That is the difference between being helpful and being commercially reckless. A mature contractor can support the customer while still asking, is this in scope? Does this create a change? Does this need to be documented? And all of this is not being difficult. It's being the adult in the room. And frankly, some rooms could use an adult. Now let's talk about why it matters even more under firm fixed price work. You see, under firm fixed price, the contractor owns the cost risk. That means every unpriced hour matters. Every extra meeting matters. Every unplanned deliverable matters. Every small request matters because small requests do not always stay small. They stack, one on top of the other. One extra data pull, 2 extra meetings, 3 additional revisions, 4 new assumptions. And suddenly your fixed price contract has become the buffet where the customer keeps filling the plate and your company keeps paying the bill. Under cost type work, though, you may have more flexibility. Not unlimited flexibility, but under firm fixed price, informal work can turn directly into a profit erosion. You can't always go back later and say, actually, we'd like to be paid for all the extra things that we casually agreed to without documenting them. That is not a strong recovery strategy. But it is a hope-based accounting model. And hope is not an approved indirect rate. Here's where the companies usually misstep. They think the issue is customer direction, but it's not. The deeper issue is change recognition. Customer requests are going to happen. The question is whether or not your system recognizes when something might change before the team performs the work. That's the whole ball game. I know that one stings, but it's true. Now let's bring it back to documentation, because if the issue is not documented, when it happens, the story gets worse later. You need the file to show what was requested, who requested it, and when it was requested, and whether the company preserved its rights or not. And that's not bureaucracy. That's simply survival. Because 6 months later, when everyone is trying to reconstruct what truly happened, memories become creative. The program says, well, we thought contracts approved it. Contract says, we were never asked to approve it. And the customer firmly believes that we thought it was included. It's beautiful. A full orchestra of regret. The file is supposed to prevent that. Not because paperwork is sacred, because unclear history is very expensive. Now let's add the subcontractor layer, because apparently the basic problem was not already fun enough, but when customer direction changes the prom's work, it may also affect your subcontractors. Maybe a subcontractor has to add hours. Maybe they'll have to travel, or they'll need to support more meetings. What that means is the prom is now stuck in the middle. The government thinks the work is included, the subcontractor wants to be paid, and the prom didn't price any of it. And now the contract is being asked to perform an exorcism on a file that should have been controlled 3 weeks ago. That is why customer direction cannot live only with the program. It touches contracts, it touches pricing and subcontracts, and it certainly affects your overall profits. If your company treats customer direction like a casual operational issue, well, then you shouldn't be shocked when it becomes a contractual problem. And that's not bad luck. That's just bad controls. If this episode is making you think, well, we may not have a way that recognizes customer direction before it becomes unpriced work, well, that's a good thing. Well, that's the point. Because this is exactly the kind of risk that gets exposed when contractors move into more firm fixed price and performance-based environments. Firm fixed price work does not just test your pricing abilities, it tests your overall discipline. For that reason, we built the fixed price conversion risk assessment tool. It was designed to help contractors identify where the fixed price risk may be hiding before they accept work their system is not ready to control. Just go to GovConAdvisoryGroup.com and look for the fixed price conversion risk assessment. Because if your company cannot control customer direction, fixed price will not create the problem. It'll just expose it. All right, I want to bring this one home. Customer direction is not automatically a bad thing. Helping the customer is not a bad thing. Being responsive is not bad. But performing extra work without recognizing, documenting, pricing, and controlling it, that's bad. That's where scope creep becomes unpriced work. And your desire to be helpful becomes profit erosion. And that's where contractors end up doing work that they cannot bill, they cannot recover, they cannot explain or defend. The dangerous part is that rarely feels dangerous in the moment it is happening. It feels like you're being cooperative. It feels like good customer service. And that is until the profit report shows up looking like it needs emergency medical attention. So the next time someone says, can you just take a quick look at this? Pause, not dramatically and not forever. Just pause. No need to clutch your pearls and summon legal. Just pause long enough to ask, is this in scope? Is it funded? Does this change our schedule? Does this need to be documented? All right, guys, that's it for this episode. I do encourage you to figure out if you have a system that protects you from scope creep. So if you're not sure whether your system can handle the pressure, go to our website, GovConAdvisoryGroup.com. Run that fixed price conversion risk assessment. Because fixed price doesn't reward friendly emails, it only rewards disciplined execution. And if you would, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell your friends about us. And you guys already know, we are broadcasting from deep inside the Federal Acquisition Labyrinth. And of course, this episode has been cleared for public release by Adjustment.
If today's episode sounded a little too familiar, that's probably a sign. Until next time, keep your files tight, your logic tighter. Remember, if your compliance approach is built on checking boxes, you're building risk. We'll see you next time on the GovCon Show.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.